It's a pleasure to be part of this initiative and this workshop, which has been designed to deliberate on issues in the context of clinical trials. And I'm grateful to Dr. Mathur and organizing team for inviting me to speak to you on the first session of this workshop, and which is on introduction to epidemiology. What I thought when Dr. Mathur has requested me to speak to you on introduction to the epidemiology is that in a given slot of time, I would focus on fundamentals of epidemiology. And I would begin my deliberation with explaining you what epidemiology is all about. Then I will also dwell upon historical aspects of epidemiology, definition of epidemiology, would explain you aims of epidemiology, and then you take you through what epidemiological approach is with the focus on principles of epidemiology, and then spend some time on concept of causation, epidemiological triad, and association and causation, because this is important in the context of epidemiology, and then take you through how to design epidemiologic research question and what are the study design options that are available when you wanted to undertake research in the context of epidemiology. And then finally, would take you through offshoots of epidemiology, uses and applications of epidemiology, and epidemiologic research spiral. So these are very fundamental issues in the context of epidemiology that I thought would deliberate in maybe this 75 minutes session. Let's begin with the understanding of what epidemiology is all about. The word epidemiology that we all understand has a Greek origin. And if you dissect this word epidemiology in epi, demos, and logos, it tells that epi means upon or among, demos means people, and logos means study. So this translates to saying that epidemiology means the study among people. The center, the hallmark of epidemiology is the population, is the people. And study among the group of the people is something which was initially thought about epidemiology. Epidemiology is considered and recognized as a very fundamental core area and basic science of public health. It provides tools and techniques to the advancement of public health. We will, of course, deliberate in more detail in this context, but we see epidemiology as a very important instrument in advancing public health. Over the period of time, as the science of epidemiology has evolved, and with the evolution of the science of epidemiology, its definition too evolved. And I would present you a few definitions which are more relevant, but to explain you the scope of epidemiology. But before that, let me take you through some historical glimpses and some historical issues related to epidemiology. As I mentioned, that epidemiology is believed to have begun with the Greeks. And if you track Greek literature, you would be able to identify the causation of disease which has been attributed to some environmental factors. When there was an occurrence of disease in the communities, and when the scientists in those days tried to investigate what could be the cause of the disease, they have looked at environmental factors probably would contribute to the disease causation. Hippocrates in 400 BC, on the disquisitions on airs, waters, and places, you would find that physical environment, including the seasonal variation in illness, was thought to be related to the disease. He was a Greek physician, and those days hypothesized the causation of the disease and what could result into a disease. John Grant in 1662, in his very seminal essays on natural and political observations made upon the bills of mortality, used quantitative techniques and methods in describing population vital statistics. This is the first incidence in the history that someone tried to use quantitative science to describe the vital statistics, which included, like, for example, birth and death data, infant mortality. He also presented and compared mortality in the context of gender differences. He was habituation by profession and was considered as one of the very early pioneers of propagating quantitative techniques in epidemiology. Third individual that I would like to mention to you is William Parr. In 1839, in his essays on annual reports of the Registrar General, he developed a system for routine compilation of numbers and causes of the deaths. He was a British epidemiologist and established an approach for vital statistical data to the evaluation of health problems of the general public. So these three individuals, Hippocrates, Grant, and Farr, if you look at their work over a period of time, has contributed extensively to the sophisticated understanding which was built over a period of time related to the occurrence of the disease in the community, that was called as the disease frequency, and how the disease is distributed, focusing on the disease pattern in the community, are the early examples of how epidemiology has evolved over the period of time. Thomas Sydenham, he was an English physician and was recognized as founder of clinical medicine and epidemiology because he used the tools and techniques of epidemiology in clinical medicine, has emphasized on two important and critical issues. First, detailed observation of the patients, and second, on accurate record keeping. You would appreciate that one of the very fundamental principles of epidemiology, and we will deliberate on that, is keen observation. As an epidemiologist, you need to be very intelligent observer of the things that are happening around. And the second important issue he highlighted was about accurate record keeping. You would understand the relevance and relate this with, currently we talk about evidence-based clinical practice and evidence-based medicine, because we believe that there has to be documentation, there has to be evidence. He propagated these two important basic fundamental ideas in those days and contributed to epidemiology. But the history of epidemiology obviously could be talked about for hours together. But without mentioning the name of two gentlemen, James Lynn and Edward Jenner, then it would remain incomplete. James Lynn was a very, in the history, if you look at, was the first ever has used clinical trials to answer some question. He developed the theory that citrus fruits can cure scurvy. And he used a control group as a treatment group. what he did is that in his experiment, which was a typical clinical trial, he divided 12 sick sellers into 6 pairs and provided each of those pairs with a different supplement in their diet, like cedar, then vitriolic elixir, which was the diluted sulfuric acid, vinegar, and then seawater, and 2 oranges and a lemon, or a purgative mixture. And by conducting this experiment, he was able to demonstrate the connection and association between the citrus fruits and scurvy. Edward Jenner pioneered clinical trials for vaccination to control the spread of smallpox that we are all aware about. And Jenner's work and contribution has influenced several contemporary scientists, including Louis Pasteur, the great scientist, who developed vaccine against rabies and other infectious diseases. So the contribution of James Lean and Edward Jenner was very pioneering in designing experiments and testing interventions. Ignaz Semmelweis pioneered hand washing with chlorinated lime solutions to help prevent the spread of septic infections in mothers following birth. Those days, there was an attempt to see what could help in reducing perinatal mortality, particularly the sepsis, which was an important cause. And he used and he evaluated this whole intervention of hand washing with chlorinated lime solutions. It is also an important contribution of using interventions to reduce the mortality. You will all recognize these 2 pictures, the hand pump and John Snow. John Snow was an English physician, and he has tremendously contributed to the understanding of epidemiology. His basic contribution in those days was towards the concept of formulation and testing of an hypothesis through a conduct of experiment, where he evaluated the cause for transmission of cholera in London City. He investigated the association between cholera and contaminated water supply in London City. In 1849, there was a cholera epidemic which killed several people in the city of London. And the high rates in the areas being supplied by 2 water providing companies in the city of London. But over the period of 5 years, from 1849 to 1854, what happened is that one of the companies, that's Lambeth, which also is which was responsible for providing water supply to the city of London, has relocated to a less contaminated part of the Thames. And what happened is that during second cholera epidemic after 5 years in 1854, the Broad Street, that is the area where it was severely affected because of cholera, very significant number of cases were reported from the houses which received water supply from Southwark and Buxley Company, which was considered as a contaminated water, as compared to the company that's Lambeth, which was relocated somehow 5 years during this 5 years of period in the area of Thames where there is less polluted water was there. And this was termed as a natural experiment where John Snow has demonstrated the cause of the cholera. Snow's methodology maintains contemporary relevance in the field of epidemiology. It taught us how to use logical organization of observations. It taught us to design a natural experiment. He used quantitative approach, which is the soul of epidemiology, and practically he used shoe leather epidemiology principles. To continue deliberations related to the historical aspects of epidemiology, to throw some light on academic development or the development of epidemiology as an academic discipline, the Epidemiological Society in London was established in 1850s under the presidency of Earl of Shaftesbury. Around 1920s in United States, Winslow and Sedgwick lectured in epidemiology and opened the ways of epidemiology being part of the formal curriculum in medical schools. W.H. Frost became the first professor of epidemiology in the United States in 1927 with the establishment of Department of Epidemiology. Later, Major Greenwood, after a few years, became the first professor of epidemiology and medical statistics in the University of London. So the epidemiology was recognized as an academic discipline and could find position in the universities. With this brief historical background at how epidemiology has evolved, we will continue to deliberate that historical perspective, but reflecting on some key definitions of epidemiology. Because the way the epidemiology has evolved over a period of time, the evolution of epidemiology itself tells us this four definition that I presented to you would help us to understand how the scope of epidemiology has expanded over a period of time. Parkin in 1873 tells us that the branch of medical science which treats epidemics. So around that time, the epidemiology was synonymously attributed to that the branch of medical science which deals with the epidemics. But with the advancement of time, Frost in 1927 tells us the science of the mass phenomena of infectious diseases. He broadened his viewpoint beyond epidemics. It is not only the epidemics, but when you have infectious diseases in numbers happening in the communities, so the word mass phenomena of infectious diseases. But Greenwood, after a few years in 1934, further expanded this definition and scope to tell us that why only infectious diseases? The study of disease, for that matter, any disease, as a mass phenomena. If you have multiple number of people being infected or multiple number of people being subjected to a certain disease condition, then it was thought of epidemiology. But McMahon in 1960 then further refined, when you talk about mass phenomena, but maybe for any disease for that matter, what does it mean? So he brought three important terms, and which became basically integral part of the definition of epidemiology. He talked about the distribution of the disease, the pattern of the disease in the community. He talked about determinants of the disease in the context saying that what causes disease, what are the factors which are responsible for the disease. He also mentioned about the frequency of the disease. So telling us the burden of disease in the communities. So this is a much more expanded definition of epidemiology. This definition was further refined by Last in his dictionary on epidemiology. What he said is that the study of distribution and determinants of health-related states or events in specified populations and the application of this study to control of health problems. I highlighted some words in this definition and presented them in red color for you, because we will deliberate this further. because every word is important. When you say study, what exactly means study? When you say distribution or determinants or specific population, what does it mean? We'll deliberate on these red colored phrases or words in a moment or so. But let me tell you that these three closely interrelated components, determinants, distribution, and frequency, are the hallmark of this definition, which encompasses all epidemiological principles and methods. As I said, the word I highlighted, the word study as a red color. What does it mean? Study means it could be surveillance, it could be keen observation, it could be hypothesis testing, it could be an analytical research or experiments. Distribution includes analysis by time, place, and person, because when you say that disease is distributed in the community, so in the context of the time, over the period of time. Place, geographic distribution, which continent of the world, which country, or within the countries, which provinces, or which parts of the country, or which districts, or even within the districts, which places, villages, or other places. And that is true for even person also, like whether males or females, or related to a particular age group. Similarly, for determinants, what causes the disease? And we will talk further about epidemiological triad. We will talk about these factors, but it could be physical variables, it could be biological factors, social, cultural. Social and cultural factors were traditionally neglected are important determinants of the disease because the conditions in which we born, we grow, live, work, age, have all influence on our health. Professor Michael Marmot has propagated the whole idea of contribution of social determinants in the context of public health and epidemiology, an instrument to investigate that. Behavioral factors also. When you mention about health-related states or events, it could be diseases, but it may not be necessarily only diseases. It could be causes of death also. It could be behavior, like for example, now alcohol consumption or smoking. Now, smoking is not a disease. Tobacco smoking is not a disease, but tobacco smoking is a behavior which contributes to, we know, several diseases and finally contributing to the reduction in life expectancy and a huge amount of mortality. We all are aware about it. Even reactions to the preventive regimes. Now we are living in the period of COVID-19 pandemic, and you have seen the resistance for the use of vaccines, the vaccine hesitancy. So we need to understand that why somebody is taking vaccine, why somebody is opposing the vaccine. What are the factors that people are hesitant to take the vaccine? This is all integral part of epidemiology, and vaccine hesitancy is not a disease for that matter. It's a behavior, it's a reaction, provision and use of health services, health seeking behavior of the communities. Why, even if the accessible, the services are accessible, available, but still some people are availing services, but certain group of people are not availing services. So we need to understand the dynamics of why people are availing services, why some people are not seeking services, if we wanted to really promote the universal health coverage. And all these are critical and important and integral part of epidemiology. Specified populations, those groups of people with identifiable characteristics, in which population groups the disease is more common. Like for example, coal workers pneumoconiosis, and you would find, like for example, several occupational diseases, like cycle rickshaw pullers, you would find varicose veins. Then you would find floor mill workers, the high amount of respiratory morbidity being attributed to them. Healthcare workers are exposed to particular set of infections in the hospital setting. So in a specified population also we need to study. That is also integral part of epidemiology, and that we call as occupational epidemiology. Then finally, application to control these problems, because understanding of the disease dynamics and factors that contribute to the diseases are important. But how do we control and how do we use the principles of epidemiology to control the disease spread in the community is the most important. And therefore, that is to assess like public health importance of the diseases, identify the population who is at more risk, to study causes of diseases. You want to understand the natural history of disease and evaluate the prevention and control measures and strategies that we use. So there could be multiple interventions in the context of controlling the disease dynamics in the community that we use the principles of epidemiology. But three are important, which I enumerated, which last also propagated. Disease frequency, that is the occurrence in the community, how frequently the disease is happening in the community. Distribution of the problems in the context of who are the people who are affected, when are they affected, where are they affected. And that can be studied with through routinely collected data, or you can undertake some systematic studies also for that matter. When we'll deliberate on study options, we will talk about it. Then determinants of the health and disease, which is most important. Whenever any disease happens in the community, the first important question that we need to answer is, what are the factors which are responsible for occurrence of this disease? This novel coronavirus, when came, and COVID-19 pandemic, the first thing that people started investigating is that what is the root cause and what has contributed to, what are the factors which contributes to, which has contributed to this disease happening. So the knowledge in the context of frequency, distribution, and determinants of the disease is critical and important to describe the disease pattern, compare the disease in different population groups, and also to test epidemiological hypotheses so that we can create the evidence for controlling the disease in the community. Before we move further forward, I wanted to re-emphasize one more thing, which I mentioned earlier briefly, is the concept of population in epidemiology. Epidemiology is absolutely incomplete without the population. Population remains a very important concept in epidemiology because that forms the denominator. Because epidemiology is all about when you actually express epidemiology in terms of rates and ratios and proportions, those are the measurements which are used to present the findings through the epidemiology, like disease frequency or risk of the individuals. There, the denominator is always a population. And the numerator, we say, like, for example, we have 1,000 people, and how many of them are suffering from a particular disease? So those who are suffering from the disease would sit into numerator, but you have a denominator where you have the size of the population. Sometimes people get confused with demography, but demography is different. Demography is the science of population, basically. It's study of population. It deals with the population where the growth of the population, the growth rate, crude death rate, crude birth rate, net growth rate. So that is demography. But in epidemiology, the concept of population here is as a denominator. That this is what the population, and this population may be of the world population, it could be a population of a nation, it could be a population of a district or a village for that matter, or even a small group, like people staying in particular area, or people, and it could be like students in a school. It could be like people working at in some coal mines or some silica mines. And therefore, for understanding the whole philosophy of epidemiology, you have to remember the population is important, and it could be like people, it could be even health related events also for that matter. It could be places also. I would also like to explain briefly the difference between clinical medicine and epidemiology. The unit of study in clinical medicine is a case or cases. Because a clinician who is sitting in a hospital or a clinic is encountered with individual case or cases. But when you talk in terms of epidemiology, we talk in terms of population. We do not talk about individual case or a group of cases. We talk about a population. And therefore, in clinical medicine, our focus is disease in an individual. Some individual is confronted with you, and you try to look at what is wrong with the, based on signs and symptoms and some investigations, we try to diagnose the disease in an individual. But in epidemiology, we would like to study the pattern of disease in the population, in the community, where we would look at not only the sick individuals, but also healthy individuals. So in clinical practice, in clinical medicine, we focus ourselves on diagnosis, treatment, and prognosis related to individual patient. But in epidemiology, we talk about community diagnosis. Community diagnosis means a particular village, what percentage of adults are obese for that matter, or what percentage of adult males and females have hypertension. So it's a community diagnosis. And what could be the strategies that could be used to reduce the prevalence of obesity or hypertension in that community? How do we improve the health outcomes in terms of community? In clinical practice, in clinical medicine, patient goes to the clinic. That who comes to your clinic, and then you look at it, look that person. But epidemiologist goes to the community. Community is a laboratory for epidemiologist. But I would also like to mention that the tools and techniques that we use in epidemiology are very much applicable to the clinical medicine also. And that branch, that offshoot of epidemiology, which uses the tools and techniques of epidemiology in clinical practice and clinical research, is called as clinical epidemiology. Then move on to understand what is the aim of epidemiology. International Epidemiologic Association, that is IEA, has presented these three aims, which also aligns with what we just talked about in the context of the evolution of definition of epidemiology. Distribution and magnitude. Describing the burden of disease is the first and foremost important thing for the public health. Secondly, then to study the factors which contributes to that, etiological factors. And third important issue is related to planning, implementation, and evaluation. And we need information on that. We need data for that. Suppose we wanted to plan health services. Unless you know what is the burden of disease, unless you know the health-seeking behavior of the communities, unless you know how the risk factors are distributed in the community, how can you plan the health services? How can you design public health programs? How can you implement those public health programs? And for that matter, how do you evaluate those public health programs? You would find application of epidemiology there. So ultimately, epidemiology is responsible and accountable for eliminating or reducing the health problem or its consequences in the community. The whole idea is that how we use the principles of epidemiology in public health to promote the health and well-being of the society as a whole. But I wanted to reiterate what I briefly mentioned earlier. The important issue that epidemiology can address is not only the disease. Of course, the disease is important, and disease is responsible for many other things, including mortality or quality of life or hospitalization, everything, because disease remains the fundamental entity. But even studying the mortality. Now, if you wanted to focus on COVID-19 pandemic, and you see that how do we control the containment of controlling the transmission of virus in the communities, is important to prevent the occurrence of the disease so that we have less number of people who suffer from COVID-19. But once the individual has acquired COVID-19 infection, then probably we also need to focus, how do we focus on these individuals who develop the disease so that we can reduce case fatality ratio in the group of individuals who have already contracted the infection. So the public health intervention that we use for the COVID-19 pandemic, the first set of interventions are reducing the transmission of disease in the community so that less number of people are, it is lockdown and asking people to stay at home, wearing masks. not going to the crowded places. These all are interventions towards basically we reduce the transmission, we reduce the number of cases. But we know that certain individuals will still contract infection. But those then who have contracted infection, next set of interventions is that we have to reduce the mortality. Early diagnosis is important. This RT-PCR testing, we strongly recommend if you have some signs and symptoms, please immediately, test yourself. Once you test yourself, isolate yourself. Then they are put on some home, the treatment prescribed by the doctors. If there are some parameters, clinical parameters, which indicates then hospitalization, early hospitalization, and then within the hospitalization, the interventions. So that's related to reducing the mortality. Hospitalization, even disability for that matter, quality of life, health status of the population. So epidemiology focuses on all these parameters. It is not only the disease. And I always say that epidemiology is an extraordinary, a brilliant tool in the field of public health. Why I'm saying so is because in public health, and when we teach our MPH graduates and public health graduates, we generally say that you can put whole public health interventions or public health activities in 4 buckets. When you are graduating from a public health course, what we expect 4 things from you. One is that you should be able to describe a public health problem. As a public health professional or a public health practitioner, you should be able to describe the problem, public health problem. The second bucket is you should be able to design solutions to deal with that problem. The third bucket is you should then be able to implement those interventions. So the delivery of those interventions. And finally, fourth bucket, you should be able to evaluate whether it has worked or it has not worked. So the first bucket is that you should be able to describe a public health problem. Second is that you are able to design the solution to deal with the problem. Third is you are able to deliver the public health interventions, actually delivery of public health interventions. And then finally to see whether it has worked or not, evaluation of that. And in all those 4 areas, you need tools, techniques, principles, approaches, methods of epidemiology. You pick up anything like delivery of those interventions or designing those solutions. You need public health interventions. And therefore, we say that epidemiology as a tool for public health. Now, let's move on to the principles of epidemiology. I briefly mentioned about keen observation. If you wanted to be a good epidemiologist, you need to be a very keen observant. You have to acquire this competency of being a very keen observer. Look at the things from epidemiological perspective. Ask questions to yourself. But reflection is important. So the keen observation is the first, if you wanted to be a good epidemiologist, you learn this competency of keen observation and asking questions. And we'll deliberate on that further in a moment or so. You have to ask questions, why it has happened, how it has happened, who are responsible for that. And then you should be able to develop a competency of making comparisons. Those who suffered from the disease and those who have not suffered from the disease. You need that competence of comparison. And then finally, connecting dots, reflections and analysis. So these are the 4 important principles of epidemiology that I would say that if you wanted to be a good epidemiologist, you need to be good observant. You need to develop a habit of asking questions. You build on your competence of making comparisons and connecting dots, data triangulation and other things to undertake reflections and analysis. to arrive at some conclusions for the control of disease. If you want to be a real seeker of the truth, it is necessary that at least once in your life you doubt as far as possible on all things. Descartes, he was a great philosopher, has told us this, which really emphasizes what I mentioned to you. The epidemiological approach revolves around asking questions. I kept 6 honest serving men. They taught me all I know. Their names are what, why, when, how, where, and who. You have to remember all these W's to ask in the context of anything which is happening in the community. What is happening? Why is happening? When is happening? How is happening? Where it is happening? Who are the sufferers? Is important. Asking questions, which I will mention to you as an epidemiological approach. What health event it is? How much is the magnitude of the health event? Where did the event occur? When did it happen? Who all are affected? They will all describe the disease pattern in the community. But when you move to the answer, the next question, why did it occur? It will explain you to understand what are the determinants which probably have contributed to this particular event. And then you further go forward to answer this question, what needs to be done to control or prevent it would help you to design a preventive strategy. For example, the questions which are related to the health action, because the health action is ultimately important. Why we describe disease? Why do we identify frequency of the disease? Why do we identify determinants for the disease? Is basically to plan a control strategy, because finally we have to take the control of the disease. So what can be done to reduce the problem? How it can be prevented? What action should be taken by the community, for example, in COVID-19 pandemic? We expect community that they should avoid crowded places. They should avoid travel as much as possible. They should stay at home unless it is really required to go out. They should wear masks when they go to out of public places. These are expected restrained activities on the part of the communities, but by the health services also, that the government is providing testing facilities, the hospitals are provided, the facilities are being created, the vaccine is being provided, treatment modalities are being made available. These are all actions by the health services, even by other sectors, because we don't have too much of a time, but public health is in true sense is a multifactorial, multi-sectoral, multi-layered. Because in public health, you need intervention and engagement of several factors. Now, the role of pharmaceutical sector in drugs and providing vaccines is very important. If you wanted to study for that matter, like air pollution and an epidemiology of air pollution, we see that the role of other sectors is so important. Road and Transport Ministry or Industry Ministry, they have important role. In tobacco and sugar-sweetened beverages and junk food, role of the ministries which play important role in the area of taxation for that matter. So it's multi-sectoral, so other sectors also have role. What resources are required? We generally, most of our developing countries, we function in the resource constraint settings, and therefore resources are important, how efficiently and effectively we utilize those resources. How are the activities to be organized? What difficulties may arise in implementation? Again, these are the questions. Now move on to the concept of causation. Initially, historically, when disease used to happen, there were some theories came forward, like for example, supernatural theory of disease, the theory of humors, the concept of contagion, miasmatic theory of disease, the theory of spontaneous generation. But true scientific impetus was received when the germ theory of disease was propagated, when it was thought that it is not the empirical causes, like for example, bad air, but to the microbes. as we had seen that the John Snow investigated the contaminated water supply, but we subsequently realized that it's a Vibrio cholerae for that matter, the contamination because of the microorganism. So the shift from these causes to the microbes. But still in germ theory of disease, the focus was on one-to-one relationship, that Mycobacterium tuberculosis causes tuberculosis or measles virus causes measles. But it moved further forward that it recognizes that subsequently we realized that yes, you cannot suffer from tuberculosis unless you are infected from the TB bacilli. But we have seen several people are infected with TB bacilli, but not everybody developed the disease. So there must be some other factors also which contributes to the occurrence of the tuberculosis, where it is necessary to have TB bacilli, but it is not sufficient. But this was subsequently expanded to the understanding of chronic diseases and non-communicable diseases. That we all know that tobacco smoking is a significant risk factor for, suppose, coronary heart disease. But not that everybody who smokes develops the coronary heart disease. And it is also not true that everybody who develops coronary heart disease smokes. Although the risk, if you are a tobacco smoker, is significantly high for the development of coronary heart disease. So the chronic diseases and non-communicable diseases particularly has, made us to understand that there are multiple factors which contributes to the disease in the epidemiology, multifactorial epidemiology for that matter. Now, let me take you through, therefore, in that context, what is epidemiological triad? Because we are talking about the factors, what cause the disease. Epidemiological triad, and it is also called as sometimes epidemiological triangle, tells us that you can position all the factors which can contribute to disease in three groups: related to the agent, related to the host, and related to the environment. And this is very old concept in epidemiology, and we can see even today it is very much applicable to the knowledge of understanding of epidemiology, which help us to also understand whether a disease will be localized or will get converted into a pandemic or so. Host factors include related to individual, like age, race or gender or genetic profile, previous disease, marital status, family background, customs, religions, and all those factors. Agent factors like biological agents, like we know viruses, bacteria, fungal infections, parasitic infections, or chemicals like alcohol, smoke, physical like trauma, radiation, fire, nutritional like lacking something like vitamin D deficiency or vitamin C deficiency, or excess also like consumption of salt and sugar and fat and resulting into obesity and some other conditions. Environmental factors like temperature, humidity, altitude, crowding, housing. So these are all parameters, water, milk, food, they all contribute to the, and so it's a simplistic approach of understanding how the disease can be presented to all of us. But I will explain this epidemiological triad by taking an example of COVID-19 pandemic. And I mentioned agent, host, and environment. So let's talk first about the agent. Like COVID-19 pandemic, we have SARS-CoV-2 as the agent. This is virus as agent. But knowing agent is not only sufficient. We also need to understand the infectiousness, the ability to infect. And you must have heard about this R effective and R not in the context of COVID-19, that we say that one individual is infected, then to how many individuals that person can transmit the infection. So that's the infectiousness. Then the pathogenicity, virulence. Once you develop the disease, once you contracted the infection, then how much pathogenicity and virulence could be attributed in terms of, the severity of the disease, resulting into hospitalization, resulting into a death. So the transmissibility and virulence are the two important parameters which we are talking about. The number of virus particles that would be required to get infected. Then how the disease is transmitted is how the disease, this virus is transmitted, this respiratory virus. We know that it is transmitted through droplets, and now because this is a novel disease and the evidence is emerging over the period of time, and now we also recognize that there is airborne transmission also, and which enters into our body through nose and mouth. So this knowledge is all important. And based on, therefore, the use of the mask is very strongly advocated for prevention of the infection. It has the ability to bind itself to a receptor typically when it gets into your respiratory system. And we have also seen some new strains of the virus have also emerged because of this virus, the capacity for antigenic shift and drift, and therefore the mutants are created, and we have to see that whether these new mutants are either more infectious or more virulent, or whether our vaccines will work against these mutants or not. So this is all about the agent. When you talk about the host, that we all human beings are a host, our health condition, risk of exposure, our medical history, the conditions, behavior of the host, like for example, risky behavior, not using mask, moving into the crowded places, closed spaces, engagement. These are all important. Hygienic practices, hand washing practices, which are very sanitary hygienic practices, are being recommended historically in public health and medicine. Occupation, like doctors and nursing professionals and healthcare professionals, they work in the hospitals, so they are confronted with the COVID-19 patients and are at more risk as compared to people who may not come into contact. Then the shopkeepers or vegetable vendors or the frontline workers, they are all exposed because the shopkeeper would be in touch with several people who are visiting his shop or her shop. Similar story of vegetable vendors or police department people. So these are all important. This knowledge is important. Immunological status. We say that somebody is, after contracting infection, resulting into hospitalization and death, and some individuals do not. So what's the reason? Age, gender. We had seen in the first wave, particularly when the disease was stuck earlier in China, and then subsequently in Europe and United States and Brazil also, we reported this is much more in the mortality was significantly high in the elder population. So all these are the host parameters. Similarly, environmental parameters, external factors, like for example, the conditions in which people live, like crowded places. Now, when somebody tests positive, we say that that person needs to be isolated. But suppose in a room where 3, 4, 5 people are staying, particularly in urban slums or some crowded places like Dharavi in Mumbai, which is one of the largest urban slums, there may be a story somewhere in Dhaka, and anywhere would be the same story, that you would find that the overcrowding is there and the disease transmission happens more efficiently and effectively. Sanitation, availability of the health services is important. Our whole public health interventions in the context of testing and tracing, isolation, quarantine measures, these are all environmental parameters which will determine the interaction between the virus and human beings. So the agent, host, and environmental parameters contribute to the whole disease dynamics in the communities. Now let's move on to understanding of the association and causation. And why I'm saying so, because that tells us about the disease dynamics in the community. Some associations are spurious associations, where the association between a disease and suspected factor is not real. I will just give an example. Long time back, historically, there was a study reported in the United Kingdom. The study was comparing the outcome of the deliveries which were happening at the home and deliveries which were happening at the institution, that at the healthcare facility. And quite substantial side that there were the data of 5,000 more deliveries at home and around 11,000 plus deliveries in the hospital. But they found the perinatal mortality rate was high in the deliveries happening in the healthcare facility as compared to the home deliveries. Then can you attribute and say that the homes are the safer places for delivery? Spurious association, because we all recognize that deliveries which happened in the healthcare facilities were relatively more complicated, and therefore outcome is likely to be challenging there. So this could be one of the important reason, and therefore some associations could be spurious associations. There could be indirect associations also. Like initially it was reported iodine deficiency disorders or endemic goiter in sub-Himalayan belt. And people had started relating endemic goiter with altitude, that because they said that you live at the places where at high altitude, then you suffer from iodine deficiency disorders, endemic goiter. But subsequently it was identified it was not the high altitude, but it was because of the deficiency of iodine, because of the consistent erosion that has happened in the at high altitude places, resulted into a iodine deficiency in the environment there, in the soil there, and has contributed to the causation of the endemic goiter. There could be direct causal association like one-to-one causal and multifactorial that we talked about. But the criteria are important. And these criteria are temporal association, biological plausibility, strength of the association, specificity of the association, consistency of the association, coherence of the association, analogy of the association. All these parameters needs to be satisfied when you say that the association is not a casual association, but a causal association. And that's what the whole idea of talking about the association and causation is. So let's move on to understanding the epidemiologic research question. Because finally, we need to answer some question, and we have to articulate, reorganize and design this research question. And in our epidemiological practice, it could happen that through our clinical practice or professional or reading literature or discussions, we evolve a question. The question that we have in mind, because in epidemiology, there has to be first research question, and then you use epidemiological methods like case control study or the cohort study or the intervention studies to answer that question. I will tell, like, for example, when COVID-19 came, few months back, 8 or 10 months back, or almost a month, almost a year or so, the question is that why somebody's dying and why somebody was not dying. What are the predictors of mortality attributable to the COVID-19 pandemic? What are the factors? Why somebody is dying? So that was a research question. But when you wanted to actually employ epidemiological study design to answer that research question, it has to be relevant. It has to be ethical. It has to be feasible, interesting, novel. And I'm sure in some other sessions also you will deliberate on this. But what is that smart research question in the context of epidemiology is that a question that we have in mind, like for example, the research question could be, what are the predictors of mortality attributable to COVID-19 pandemic or attributable to the mortality because of COVID-19? It should be sharp, specific, simple to understand. It should be measurable. Finally, you have to measure. Measurement is one of the very core and integral part of epidemiology. Achievable in realistic manner, relevant to the current context and time bound. So these are some questions, and these are not applicable to only epidemiologic research, but any piece of research that you wanted to design. These are the things which you have to keep in mind when you design a smart research question. Now, once you have a research question in your mind, then appropriately you have to identify what kind of study design that I would like to use. Epidemiologic study designs can be classified in two important buckets: observational designs and experimental designs. In observational designs also, you can put them into two categories. One is a descriptive category and another is analytical category. In descriptive category, like the first case of COVID-19, if you remember last February, March 2020, you would have seen in several journals, there were case reports of this novel coronavirus infection reported from Wuhan and subsequently from Italy and other European countries and United States also. But in a single case report, describing that whole clinical presentation and the prognosis and the parameters to tell us about this is something has happened. And putting and assembling to a few cases together becomes a case study. That's a descriptive. Even a cross-sectional study for that matter. which can be analytic, but which could be descriptive also. When you wanted to study the prevalence of obesity in a particular community, but you wanted to also look at what are the factors which probably are responsible for obesity in that community, it becomes an analytical. Case control study, where you take the cases of a certain disease and control of some another disease, or disease-free individuals rather, I would say, and then you study the risk factors. Suppose you wanted to study the risk factors for hemorrhagic stroke, then you take the cases of hemorrhagic stroke and you controls who are not suffering from stroke, healthy individuals, and then you study the parameters that you wanted to study, maybe like severe hypertension or other parameters which probably would contribute to the hemorrhagic stroke. Cohort studies, the prospective studies. In experimental designs, it could be quasi-experimental, where you have non-randomized or non-controlled trials, and I'm sure this workshop is focusing on trials and we'll have a greater deliberation on that. But in true experimental studies, where typically randomized controlled clinical trials are carried out. And there are even subtypes within that also. The observational designs, which are more descriptive, where there is no assignment of exposure or risk factor. We just describe what we observe. It's an observation and record. And as I mentioned, it could be a single case, which could be a case report, or you put 5, 10, 20 cases together, it becomes a case study. So in observational study designs, where we describe the pattern of the disease in the community, there are no interventions. You remember, in observational study, we don't do any intervention. Whenever we do intervention, it becomes experimental design. But of course, there may be more than one factors that can contribute or affecting the exposure and outcome, where we will study them in more detail. And I mentioned a few examples like cross-sectional study, case control studies, and cohort studies, or observational designs. But they become an analytical designs because when we try to analyze what are the factors probably are also contributing. Suppose you wanted to study the prevalence of leprosy in the community. And then while you say that this percentage of population in this particular district is suffering from leprosy, at the same time, we're also trying to understand what are the determinants and what factors might probably have contributed to the leprosy. A cohort study is that you select a group of individuals and then follow them over a period of time. It may be that they are attributed to a particular factor. The group of smokers, suppose, because we know, there are in the community, there are individuals who consume tobacco, and you follow them over a period of time to see the outcome of various conditions in that particular group. And case control, I just explained to you, is a retrospective design. Like this is a case control study that we just conducted a few months back, where we wanted to study the determinants or the factors which are responsible for the severity of the disease resulting into the death because of COVID-19 parameters, COVID-19 disease. And then variety of the parameters were included. I just wanted to present this because we included so many parameters. Some of them are like general parameters like age and gender and other parameters. Some are related to respiratory system, diabetes, cardiovascular system, renal disease, cancer and other conditions. Then some coagulation parameters. Then conditions like, for example, cirrhosis or smoking. So we wanted to study many factors, close to almost 50 factors, which probably would help us to understand what are those parameters which, after somebody develops COVID-19 infection, would result into a mortality. And just to take you back again in the history, when I deliberate on descriptive and analytical epidemiology, is that John Snow has applied the principles of descriptive and analytical epidemiology that we had learned to understand what could have contributed to the occurrence of the cholera in the communities. By comparing the water supplies in two companies, he has done a comparison study where he was able to establish a cause between the cholera deaths and contaminated water was basically an analytical epidemiology. When you just observe and record is descriptive. But when you try to compare, analyze, reflect, and try to draw inference and conclusions from that, you move from descriptive epidemiology to analytical epidemiology. But the discussion would remain incomplete if I don't mention about ecological study design. Like study characteristics of the population groups are being compared. Like ecologic means it's a comparison of the group data. like per capita income of variety of the nations is being compared with the obesity prevalence in those communities. And it could be the unit of analysis could be like, for example, in the context of time, in the context of geography, the prevalence of obesity in 4 last decades and how it is increasing over a period of time. And it is in the context of time. Or socio-demographic characteristics, which ecologic data is sometimes useful, and it could be available through some studies also and readily available through some large data sets also, help us to generate hypotheses and which can be then further examined and investigated using very standard epidemiological study designs. Experimental study designs, and I'm sure this workshop is dedicated to this. The intervention studies involves where you have intervention being done. They are beyond observation, where these are all prospective studies comparing the effect and value of one or more intervention against a control. And randomization, which randomized controlled trials are considered as a gold standard designs. But we recognize that nothing is gold standard as such, because we see the value of each design, but they are the better design to generate the evidence because they have a randomization as a very, very integral feature of these designs. And these studies are often considered as providing the most reliable evidence in the context of epidemiological research. And I just mentioned that it could be a randomized controlled trials where you have randomization creating 2 groups, and then one group receiving one intervention, another group receiving either placebo or some another intervention or no intervention, and then you compare the outcomes in 2 groups. Or it could be an quasi-experimental studies where intervention does not happen randomly and the groups are formed more purposively. But to just recapitulate, there could be a variety of the study design options. I mentioned about case report, it could be case series. Sometimes the design option is in terms of correlational studies where you correlate 2 variables, like per capita consumption of salt or sugar or fats in the communities and being correlated with diabetes and hypertension and obesity and that kind of data. Cross-sectional study I mentioned about. Sometimes these studies like health-seeking behavior now. To understand the behavior of the community, you need to use some tools and techniques from health social sciences. Perception of the people. Why somebody is taking some treatment, why somebody is not taking treatment. Longitudinal studies where you follow over a period of time. I mentioned about case control study, cohort study, and ecologic study. Research and diagnostic test is also important. And we use epidemiology techniques for this purpose. Now, newer diagnostic tools are being made available for COVID-19. When we use RT-PCR test, we say that sensitivity is 70%. So for that, evaluating, suppose you wanted to use some new test is available, or some screening test is available, you have to use diagnostic techniques to actually calculate sensitivity, specificity, even positive and negative predictive values, likelihood ratios, and agreement statistics, and so on. Economic evaluation, because we know resources are limited and we have to undertake studies where we wanted to understand the economic evaluation, program evaluation, health systems research, trials we talked about. Systematic reviews and meta-analysis is one of the areas which is one of the design which is very important. Because suppose there are 8 clinical trials and 3 clinical trials tells us that drug works and 5 clinical trials tells us that drug does not work. Then the meta-analysis can be used to integrate the findings of the study and to estimate the summary estimate, to produce the summary estimates. And now the Cochrane collaboration and several agencies globally promote meta-analysis, systematic review to create evidence, which is an epidemiological tool. Methods, investigating methodological research. Hybrid design, you can combine cohort study and case control study, and you can do a nested case control study. And each of these designs, for example, a case control study could be a group matched case control study, pair matched case control study, unmatched case control study. So subtypes are also available, and these designs are available in epidemiologic research that you wanted to do. What are the offshoots of epidemiology? When you use the principles of epidemiology in clinical practice, it becomes a clinical epidemiology. When you use in the field of occupational health, it becomes occupational epidemiology. Suppose you wanted to use them to study the effect of radiation, air pollution, climate change, environmental epidemiology. Serological and molecular epidemiology, that in COVID-19, you must have heard that we had several countries, and we had in India also carried out Indian Council of Medical Research seroprevalence surveys, and we wanted to study the past infections. So we looked at the antibody levels, which were able to help us to understand how many people are already infected and resulted into the antibodies because of COVID-19. Social epidemiology, I mentioned about Professor Michael Marmot and social determinants. Genetic epidemiology, then infectious diseases epidemiology, NCDs, chronic disease epidemiology. They all use the principles of epidemiology or the offshoots of epidemiology. We actually, through this deliberation, talked about and the uses and applications of epidemiology, but I will just quickly run through you, like study of the health of the population, the overall history, how the health as such evolved over the period of time, natural history of disease, of course, investigation of outbreaks, understanding the dynamics of disease transmission, community diagnosis, identifying syndromes, estimating individual risk, studying the risk factors and determinants, to investigate efficacy of variety of the interventions, could be preventive, promotive, curative, surveillance of disease, community health interventions, prediction, like you must have heard, in India now we are at, very sad situation here. And we hear different mathematical modeling data that is available, that these many number of cases, these many number of deaths will happen by 15th of May or by 31st of May, that kind of information, predictions, evaluation of health programs, what is working, what is not working, conducting health services research. These are all applications and uses of epidemiology. And this list is so comprehensive that you would understand that how epidemiology is critical in advancing public health. So finally, 2 slides on epidemiologic research spiral. When you design a research in the context of epidemiology, you will have deciding the topic for research, literature search, designing a research question, formulating the hypothesis and framing objectives, comprehensive literature search, then developing the protocol and pre-testing and revising it, seeking clearances like institutional ethics committees, carrying out the study, analyzing the data, interpreting the results, and then writing the report and dissemination. We'll not get into the details of that, but each step probably would require a deliberation on how do we conduct an epidemiologic research. But I just enumerated the steps to you so that you do epidemiologic research more systematically. So thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm aware that some of the issues that I could not speak in more detail, but with the constraint of the time, I tried to touch upon some critical and important issues in the context of epidemiology. So thank you. Thank you for patient listening.